Wyoming Territory, 1875. The bitter wind howled across the open plains like a lonesome wolf, rattling the windows of the modest cabin that Owen Jorgensen had built with his own two hands. At 25, Owen had already carved out a respectable piece of land for himself, 40 acres with a small herd of cattle, a sturdy cabin, and a reputation as one of the most promising young ranchers in the territory. But for all his success, the cabin remained cold in ways that had nothing to do with the Wyoming winter. "No point in getting attached to folks out here," Owen muttered to his border collie, Rusty, as he stoked the fire. "People either leave or die." He'd learned that lesson watching his father waste away from consumption 3 years prior, leaving Owen to run the ranch alone. His mother had departed this world when he was just 12, and his only brother had taken off for California during the gold rush, never to be heard from again. The land was honest, though, put in the work and it gave back. People were the unpredictable element, which is why Owen kept mostly to himself, trading in town only when necessary, attending church on Christmas and Easter to keep up appearances, but otherwise maintaining a careful distance from the good people of Sweetwater Junction. He'd convinced himself that a man needed nothing more than good land, healthy cattle, and perhaps a loyal dog to lead a satisfying life. Yet sometimes, in the deepest part of night when the wind moaned through the pines, Owen would stare at the empty chair across from his at the rough-hewn table and wonder if there was something missing, something even the richest soil and fattest cattle couldn't provide. Foolishness, he would tell himself, burying such thoughts beneath plans for fence mending and cattle rotation. The frontier was no place for romantic notions. A man survived by keeping his head clear and his heart guarded. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the annual cattle drive to the railhead in Cheyenne. Owen had just finished loading supplies into his wagon when Sheriff Miller rode up to his property, dust billowing behind his horse. "Morning, Owen. Got a situation in town I could use your help with." Owen set down the bag of cornmeal he'd been loading. "What kind of situation?" Sheriff Miller removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Stage came through last night, left behind a young woman. Says she was supposed to meet her intended fellow named Harrison, but he's nowhere to be found. No one in town's heard of him." "What's that got to do with me?" Owen asked, though he already suspected the answer. His cabin was one of the few in the area with a spare room, originally built for his brother's family, that never materialized. Town's full up with the cattle buyers in from back east. Widow Jenkins would normally take her in, but she's got her sister visiting. Reverend suggested you might be able to offer temporary lodging, just until we sort things out. Owen frowned. "A strange woman in my house." "That's hardly proper, Sheriff." "Reverend's wife would come stay too, as chaperone, just for a few days, Owen. Girl's got nowhere to go and she seems, well, desperate might be the word." Owen wanted to refuse. His carefully ordered life had no room for desperate strangers with complicated problems, but something in the sheriff's expression, a mixture of concern and hope, made him hesitate. "Fine," he found himself saying. "But just until the weekend, then you find another solution." The woman waiting at the sheriff's office bore little resemblance to what Owen had expected. He'd imagined someone worn and haggard, beaten down by frontier hardship. Instead, he found himself facing a young woman of perhaps 22, with bright golden hair pulled back in a simple but neat bun. Her traveling dress of navy blue was dusty but well-made, and though her face showed signs of exhaustion and worry, there was an unmistakable brightness to her deep brown eyes that caught him off guard. "Miss Daisy Hammond, this is Owen Jorgensen," the sheriff introduced them. "He's offered you shelter until we locate your Mr. Harrison." The young woman stood, smoothing her skirt nervously. "I'm truly grateful, Mr. Jorgensen. I promise I won't be a burden." Owen nodded stiffly, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. "It's temporary," he reminded her before turning to the sheriff. "When will Mrs. Peterson be joining us?" he asked, referring to the Reverend's wife. A look passed between Miss Hammond and the sheriff that Owen couldn't quite decipher. "Well, there's been a change of plans," Sheriff Miller said carefully. Reverend Peterson was called away to a neighboring settlement. His wife couldn't leave their children. Owen stiffened. "Then this arrangement won't work. It wouldn't be proper." "Please," Miss Hammond said, her voice soft but steady. "I have nowhere else to go, and I fear something may have happened to Charles, Mr. Harrison. We were to be married the day after my arrival." Owen looked at her more carefully. There was something in her posture, a determined dignity despite her circumstances, that reminded him of his mother during the hardest years. "What about the boarding house?" Owen asked the sheriff. "Full up, as I said." Owen ran a hand through his light brown hair, weighing his options. "You can stay in the cabin," he finally decided. "I'll sleep in the barn until other arrangements can be made." Relief flooded the young woman's face. "Thank you, truly." As they loaded her single trunk into his wagon, Owen wondered what kind of trouble he was bringing home. Something about Miss Hammond's story didn't quite add up. Who was this Charles Harrison no one had heard of? And why did this refined-looking young woman travel all the way to Wyoming Territory alone to marry a man who wasn't there to meet her? The ride to his ranch was largely silent. Owen was not one for idle conversation, and Miss Hammond seemed lost in her own thoughts, occasionally wringing her gloved hands in her lap. Only when his cabin came into view, nestled against a backdrop of pines with the creek sparkling in the distance, did she speak. "It's lovely," she said with what sounded like genuine appreciation. "Did you build it yourself?" "My father and I did, before he passed." "I'm sorry for your loss," she offered. Owen merely nodded, uncomfortable with the sudden personal turn. "You'll have the cabin to yourself. I've got chores that'll keep me busy till sundown. There's food in the pantry. Help yourself." He showed her to the spare room, which contained little more than a narrow bed, a cedar chest, and a small table with a wash basin. "It's not much," he said. "It's perfect," she replied, though Owen couldn't imagine how a woman who owned a dress as fine as hers would find his humble accommodations acceptable. True to his word, Owen spent the day in the far pasture, mending fence and checking on the new calves. Working with his hands had always brought him peace, allowing him to empty his mind of complications. But today, thoughts of the golden-haired woman in his cabin kept intruding. There was something both vulnerable and resolute about her that unsettled him. When he returned at dusk, the smell of cooking greeted him before he reached the door. Inside, he found Miss Hammond setting his table with a steaming pot of stew at its center. "I hope you don't mind," she said, looking suddenly uncertain. "I thought it only fair I earn my keep." Owen was startled by the transformation of his usually barren table. She'd found the good dishes his mother had carefully packed away, and even placed a small bunch of wildflowers in a jar at the center. "You didn't have to do this," he said, removing his hat and hanging it by the door. "Please sit," she invited, as if it were her home and not his. Strangely, Owen found himself complying. The stew was good, better than his usual fare of salted meat and beans. They ate in awkward silence until Owen finally asked, "How did you come to be engaged to this Harrison fellow?" Miss Hammond's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "We corresponded for nearly a year. He placed an advertisement in a Boston newspaper seeking a bride. He described himself as a man of modest means but good prospects, looking for a woman of character to build a life within Wyoming." "And you left Boston to marry a man you'd never met?" Owen couldn't keep the judgment from his voice. Her chin lifted slightly. "My situation in Boston had become untenable. Mr. Harrison's letters were kind and thoughtful. He sent money for my passage." Her eyes dropped to her bowl. "I believed him to be honorable." "What sort of work did he say he did?" "He's a surveyor for the railroad," she answered promptly, "or so he claimed." The doubt in her voice made Owen wonder if she too was beginning to suspect deception. "The railroad hasn't sent surveyors through these parts in over 2 years," he told her. Her face fell, but she quickly composed herself. "Perhaps he works farther north." Perhaps, Owen agreed, though neither of them seemed convinced. "Sheriff will keep looking." After dinner, Owen excused himself to prepare the barn for sleeping. When he returned briefly to collect a blanket, he found Miss Hammond scrubbing the dishes with fierce determination, as if she could wash away her troubles along with the food remnants. Her shoulders shook slightly, and Owen realized with alarm that she was crying. He cleared his throat to announce his presence, giving her time to discreetly wipe her eyes. "The sheriff will find him," Owen offered awkwardly. "Or at least find out what happened." She nodded without turning. "And if he doesn't, what then, Mr. Jorgensen?" It was a question Owen had no answer for, so he simply took his blanket and retreated to the barn, where the straightforward company of horses and cattle was far less complicated than the mystery of Daisy Hammond. Days passed with no word about Charles Harrison. Owen fell into an unexpected routine with his houseguest. She cooked and kept the cabin tidier than it had been since his mother was alive, while he continued his ranch work, coming in only for meals and sleep. They spoke little, but the silence between them gradually became less strained. On the fourth day, Owen returned from town with supplies and disappointing news. Sheriff sent telegrams to every settlement within 50 miles, he reported as Daisy, as he'd begun to think of her, hung his coat by the door. No one's heard of your Charles Harrison. She absorbed this with remarkable composure. I see. There's more, Owen continued reluctantly. Sheriff got word back from Boston. The address you had for Harrison's family doesn't exist. At this, Daisy sank into a chair, her face pale. I've been deceived, she whispered. Owen stood awkwardly in the center of his own home, unsure how to respond to her quiet devastation. He was saved from having to find words when she straightened her shoulders and looked up at him with clear eyes. I should leave, Mr. Jorgensen. I've imposed on your kindness long enough. And go where? He asked. I don't know. Perhaps there's work in Cheyenne. Owen frowned. What sort of work do you think awaits a woman alone in Cheyenne? Her cheeks colored, but she held his gaze. I'm educated. I can read and write well. I could perhaps find work as a teacher or a clerk. Those positions are scarce even for men, Owen pointed out, and most require connections. Daisy's composure finally cracked. What would you have me do then? I can't stay here indefinitely. I have no funds to return east, and even if I did, there's nothing for me there. Owen surprised himself with his next words. You could stay until after the cattle drive, at least. I'll be gone 2 weeks, and it would ease my mind to know someone was watching the place. The offer had formed in his mind before he'd even considered it fully. It was reckless, impractical, and entirely contrary to his carefully constructed solitary existence. Yet the thought of sending her away to an uncertain fate troubled him more than he cared to admit. That's very kind, but... It's not kindness, he cut her off. It's practical. You need shelter, and I need someone to feed the chickens and keep an eye on things while I'm gone. Daisy studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher some hidden meaning in his proposal. Finally, she nodded. All right. Until you return from your cattle drive. That night, as Owen lay on his pallet in the barn, he questioned his own motives. Why had he offered to let her stay? Was it mere Christian charity toward a woman in distress? Or was it something else, something to do with the way the cabin felt warmer somehow when he returned to find her there, or how, for the first time in years, he found himself hurrying through his chores, looking forward to returning home? Don't be a fool, he muttered to himself. She's just a temporary guest, nothing more. But even as he said it, Owen knew something had shifted in the carefully ordered world he'd built for himself, something that both frightened and exhilarated him. The next morning dawned cool and clear. Owen was in the barn saddling his horse when Sheriff Miller rode up, his expression grim. Need to speak with you, Owen, alone. Concern immediately knotted Owen's stomach. Something about Miss Hammond. The sheriff nodded, casting a glance toward the cabin. Got a reply to my telegram to the Boston police. Seems our Miss Hammond may not be who she claims. Owen led the sheriff farther from the house. Explain. Woman matching her description is wanted for questioning in connection with a jewelry theft from a prominent Boston family where she was employed as a lady's companion. Nothing proven, mind you, but the timing of her departure and the discovery of the missing items is suspicious. Owen felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Are you certain it's her? Description matches. Golden hair, brown eyes, about 22 years of age. Name's right too. They're sending someone out, but it'll be weeks before they arrive. Owen ran a hand over his face, trying to reconcile this information with the woman who had cooked his meals and sat across from him each evening, her eyes full of dignified worry. What do you want me to do? He finally asked. Sheriff Miller sighed. Nothing for now. I've no authority to arrest her on mere suspicion. Just be careful, Owen. Don't get too involved in her troubles. Too late for that, Owen thought as he watched the sheriff ride away. He was already more involved than he'd ever intended to be. When he returned to the cabin, Daisy was humming softly as she kneaded bread dough. The domesticity of the scene struck Owen as incongruous with the sheriff's revelations. Could those delicate hands really have stolen valuable jewels? Is everything all right? She asked, noticing his troubled expression. You look concerned. Owen considered confronting her then, demanding the truth. But something held him back, perhaps the memory of her quiet dignity in the face of abandonment, or the careful way she'd restored order to his neglected home. Just thinking about the cattle drive, he lied. I leave tomorrow. Daisy smiled, though her eyes remained watchful. I promise your home will be well cared for in your absence, Mr. Jorgensen. Owen nodded, unable to shake the feeling that they were both keeping secrets now. That evening, he packed his saddlebags for the cattle drive with unusual care, his mind elsewhere. He'd reached no conclusion about what to believe regarding Daisy Hammond. The sheriff's information suggested she was a thief who had fled justice, yet everything he'd observed of her character spoke of honesty and quiet fortitude. As he closed his saddlebag, a sudden commotion from the cabin drew his attention. He heard Daisy cry out, followed by a man's harsh voice. Owen grabbed his rifle and ran toward the house. Inside, he found Daisy backed against the wall, her face pale with fear. Before her stood a rough-looking man in a dusty black coat, his hand gripping her arm. Let her go, Owen commanded, raising his rifle. The stranger turned, revealing a pockmarked face and cold eyes. This ain't your concern, rancher. The lady and I have business. Any business you have with her can be conducted without manhandling her in my home, Owen said evenly, though his heart hammered in his chest. Now step away. The man released Daisy's arm but didn't move back. Name's Silas Burke. I work for some folks back east who are mighty interested in retrieving what this young lady took from them. Owen kept his rifle steady. Miss Hammond says she was coming to meet her fiancé. Burke laughed an ugly sound. Is that what she told you? There ain't no fiancé. Never was. She ran off with her employer's jewels and made up some cock-and-bull story about a mail-order husband as cover. Owen glanced at Daisy, whose face had gone from frightened to resigned. Is this true? He asked quietly. She lifted her chin. Not entirely. Burke stepped toward her again, but Owen shifted his rifle meaningfully. Back off. Miss Hammond, I think it's time you told the whole story. Daisy took a shaky breath. I was employed as a companion to Mrs. Eleanor Harrington in Boston. Her son, Philip, began to pay me unwanted attention. When I refused his advances, he became angry. One night, he forced his way into my room. I fought him off, but the next morning, he told his mother I had tried to seduce him. When she dismissed me without a reference, Philip whispered that he had hidden her jewels in my belongings and would have me arrested if I didn't agree to become his mistress. Burke spat on Owen's clean floor. Pretty tale, too bad it's fiction. Is it? Owen countered, never taking his eyes off the intruder. Seems more believable than a lady's companion suddenly turning thief. Check her trunk, Burke suggested with a sneer. See what you find. The Harringtons are offering a substantial reward for the return of their property and this thief. Owen wavered, torn between the compelling simplicity of Burke's accusation and the desperate sincerity in Daisy's eyes. I took nothing, Daisy said quietly. Search my belongings if you must, Mr. Jorgensen. I have nothing to hide from you. Something in her steady gaze convinced Owen. I don't need to search anything. I believe you, Miss Hammond. He turned his attention back to Burke. You've delivered your message. Now get off my property. Burke's face darkened. You're making a mistake, rancher. Those jewels are worth a small fortune. The girl's feeding you lies. Maybe so, Owen acknowledged, but they're not your jewels to recover by your own admission. If the Harringtons want to press charges, they can work through the proper channels. Until then, you have no authority here. For a tense moment, Burke seemed to consider challenging Owen's rifle. Then, with a contemptuous shrug, he moved toward the door. This isn't over, he warned. The Harringtons don't give up easily. And neither do I. After Burke had gone, Owen lowered his rifle and turned to Daisy. Her composed facade had crumbled, leaving her trembling. How did he find me? She whispered. Probably followed the same trail the sheriff did. Telegrams have a way of drawing attention. Owen set his rifle aside. Is what you told me true about Philip Harrington? Daisy nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. Every word. I never took those jewels, but who would believe a penniless companion over the son of one of Boston's wealthiest families? Owen studied her for a long moment. Her fear was genuine, he was certain of that much. Whether her story was true remained to be seen, but he found himself wanting to believe her. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Burke won't give up easily, and the sheriff knows about the accusations." Daisy sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "I don't know, I thought I'd escaped all this. I truly believed Charles Harrison was real. His letters were so specific, about his life here, about the home we would build together." Her voice broke. "I'm beginning to think Philip may have orchestrated the whole thing to lure me away from Boston, where I might have found allies. Out here I'm alone and friendless." "Not entirely friendless," Owen said, surprising himself. "I'm still here." She looked up at him, her brown eyes wide with gratitude and something else, something that made Owen's chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. "Why would you help me? You barely know me." It was a fair question, one Owen had been asking himself since the moment he'd offered her shelter. "Because in my experience, people who have done nothing wrong shouldn't have to run and hide. And because I've seen enough of you these past days to form my own judgment of your character." A tear slipped down Daisy's cheek. "I wish I had something to offer in return for your kindness. But I have nothing, not even a good name anymore." Owen made a decision then, one that would change the course of his carefully ordered life forever. "Tomorrow I'm meant to leave on a cattle drive. I'm thinking perhaps I should postpone it." "Because of me?" "No, you mustn't. Your livelihood." "My livelihood can wait," Owen interrupted. "Right now we need to clear your name and deal with Burke. He strikes me as the type who works for the highest bidder. If the Harringtons sent him, it wasn't through official channels." Daisy's expression shifted to one of cautious hope. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we find out exactly who this Burke is and whether he's really working for the Harringtons at all. And while we're at it, we might look deeper into your mysterious Charles Harrison. Something tells me these matters might be connected." For the first time since Burke's intrusion, a small smile curved Daisy's lips. "You believe me, then?" Owen nodded slowly. "I'm inclined to. But more importantly, I believe everyone deserves a fair chance to prove their innocence, something you clearly haven't been given." As he spoke the words, Owen realized they represented a fundamental shift in his worldview. For years, he'd held that the safest course was to mind his own business and keep his distance from other people's troubles. Yet here he was, willingly entangling himself in a complicated situation with no clear resolution. And strangest of all, it felt right. The next morning, Owen rode into town to send telegrams to his cattle buyers explaining the delay and to the sheriff requesting information about Silas Burke. He returned to find Daisy nervously watching the road, relief flooding her face when she recognized him. "I was worried," she admitted, "that Burke might return while you were gone." "I've asked a neighbor to keep an eye on the place," Owen assured her, dismounting. "And I've brought you this." He handed her a small revolver. "Do you know how to use it?" Daisy took the weapon gingerly. "My father taught me before he died, though I never thought I'd need such knowledge." "Hopefully you won't. But it eases my mind to know you're not defenseless." Over the next few days, they established a new routine. Owen continued his ranch work but stayed closer to the cabin. In the evenings, they pieced together what they knew about Burke and the mysterious Harrison. "The letters came from Cheyenne," Daisy explained as they sat by the fire one night. "Always the same stationery, the same careful handwriting." "May I see them?" Owen asked. Daisy hesitated, then rose and retrieved a small bundle tied with ribbon from her trunk. "They're rather personal in places," she warned, her cheeks coloring slightly. Owen accepted the letters, noting the neat script and quality paper. As he read, he was struck by the writer's detailed knowledge of Wyoming Territory and ranch life. It wasn't the work of someone making up tales from far away. These were written by someone who knows this area, he concluded. The descriptions of the seasonal changes, the references to local landmarks, they're too accurate to be invented. Daisy leaned forward eagerly. Then Charles Harrison might be real after all. "The man who wrote these letters is real," Owen agreed cautiously. "Whether he's actually named Charles Harrison is another question, but it suggests something else troubling." "What?" "If these letters are genuine, then someone deliberately intercepted you in Sweetwater Junction. Someone who knew you were coming and made sure Harrison, or whoever wrote these, wasn't there to meet you. Daisy's eyes widened. Burke. Possibly, or whoever sent him. The next day brought answers in the form of a telegram from Sheriff Miller. Silas Burke was known to law enforcement throughout the territory, not as an agent of the Harrington family, but as a hired gun who worked primarily for the Blackwell Mining Company, known for its aggressive land acquisition tactics. Blackwell Mining, Owen mused, showing Daisy the telegram. They've been buying up ranch land all across the territory. Rumor has it they found silver deposits. But what would they want with me? Daisy asked, bewildered. I own nothing. Owen frowned, an unsettling suspicion forming in his mind. Perhaps it's not about you at all. Maybe it's about Harrison or whoever wrote those letters. I don't understand. What if Harrison had something Blackwell wanted, land perhaps? And they learned he was bringing a bride from the east. What better way to pressure him than to intercept his intended and threaten her safety? Daisy considered this, but if that's true, where is Charles now? And how did they know about the theft accusation in Boston? Both excellent questions, Owen acknowledged, and there's another angle we haven't explored. What if Harrison and Burke are working together? What if luring you here was part of some larger scheme? The possibilities multiplied, each more troubling than the last. They were still discussing theories when hoofbeats sounded outside. Owen grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. It's Sheriff Miller, he reported with relief. The sheriff's news, however, brought little comfort. Got word from Cheyenne, he announced once they'd settled at the kitchen table. Man matching our mysterious Harrison's description was found dead about 2 months back. Identified as one Robert Collins, a land surveyor who'd been mapping mining claims. Daisy gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Dead. But his last letter came just 3 weeks ago. Sheriff Miller frowned. That complicates matters. Owen explained their theory about Blackwell Mining's possible involvement, which the sheriff received with grave consideration. Wouldn't put it past them, he agreed. They've been mighty aggressive about expanding their holdings, but falsifying letters and inventing a mail-order bride scheme, that's elaborate even for Blackwell. Unless Collins discovered something valuable on Blackwell land that they didn't want made public, Owen suggested. Something worth killing for. The sheriff rubbed his chin thoughtfully. There are rumors Blackwell found something big up near Copper Mountain. Collins was working in that region before he died. And the Boston connection, the theft accusation, Daisy pressed. That I can't explain yet, Sheriff Miller admitted. But I aim to find out. In the meantime, Miss Hammond, you'd be wise to stay put. Between Burke and these complications with Blackwell, it's not safe for you to be traveling alone. After the sheriff departed, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. Daisy stood by the window, her slender figure silhouetted against the fading daylight. I've brought danger to your door, she said softly. I should go. Owen moved to stand beside her. And go where? If we're right about Blackwell Mining, nowhere in the territory would be safe for you. I don't understand any of this, she confessed, turning to face him. Why would someone pretend to court me through letters? Why would Blackwell Mining care about a nobody like me? And how does any of this connect to Philip Harrington's false accusations? I don't have those answers, Owen admitted. But we'll find them, he hesitated, then added more softly, together. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate situation. Daisy's eyes searched his, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. Why are you doing this, Owen, truly? It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the sound of it in her gentle voice made something shift inside him. Because for the first time since my father died, I feel like I'm part of something that matters, he answered honestly. And because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. The words had escaped before he could consider their implications, but once spoken, Owen couldn't bring himself to regret them. They were true even if they contradicted everything he'd believed about keeping his distance from entanglements. Daisy's eyes widened, and for a moment, Owen feared he'd overstepped. Then she reached out, her hand lightly touching his arm. Thank you, she whispered, for believing in me when no one else would. That night, Owen lay awake in the barn longer than usual, his mind replaying his conversation with Daisy. He'd spoken more honestly to her than he had to anyone in years, revealing feelings he'd scarcely acknowledged to himself. What did it mean, and more importantly, what came next? The comfortable solitude he'd cultivated now felt like a hollow existence compared to the vibrant tension of working alongside Daisy to solve the mystery that surrounded her. Even the constant threat from Burke and the shadowy Blackwell Mining Company couldn't diminish the strange exhilaration Owen felt at having a purpose beyond mere survival. Morning brought another telegram, this one addressed to Daisy herself. Owen watched her face pale as she read it. "What is it?" he asked. She handed him the paper with trembling fingers. "It's from Boston. My former employer, Mrs. Harrington, has died. And apparently before her death, she confessed that the jewelry was never stolen. Her son had sold it to cover gambling debts and invented the theft to deflect suspicion." Owen exhaled slowly. "So you're cleared of those charges?" "Yes, but that's not all." Daisy's voice dropped to a whisper. "The telegram mentions that Philip Harrington left Boston suddenly 3 months ago, destination unknown." The implications hung in the air between them. If Philip Harrington had followed Daisy west, seeking revenge for her rejection and escape, "We need to tell the sheriff," Owen decided. "This changes everything." Before they could act, however, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Owen moved to the window, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. "3 riders," he reported grimly. "One of them is Burke." Daisy's face hardened with determination. "I won't run anymore," she declared. "Whatever they want, whatever this is about, I'm tired of being a pawn in someone else's game." Owen admired her courage even as he calculated their odds against 3 armed men. "Get your revolver," he instructed. "And stay back from the windows." The confrontation that followed would later become legend in Sweetwater Junction. Burke and his companions, one of whom Owen recognized as a Blackwell Mining Company enforcer, demanded Daisy come with them, claiming they had questions about her involvement with Collins. Owen stood his ground on the porch, rifle steady. "Miss Hammond isn't going anywhere. If you have questions, you can ask them right here, or better yet, take them to Sheriff Miller." "This doesn't concern you, rancher," Burke growled. "The lady has information about mining claims that our employer needs." "I know nothing about mining claims," Daisy called from the doorway, her small revolver visible in her hand. "I never met Robert Collins or Charles Harrison as I knew him." The third rider, who had remained silent until now, laughed bitterly. "Oh, but you know plenty, Miss Hammond. My brother told you everything in those letters. About the silver deposits on Blackwell land that they've been hiding to avoid government taxation. About the forged deeds, about all of it." Owen glanced at Daisy, whose confusion appeared genuine. "I don't know what you're talking about," she insisted. "The letters I received were courtship letters. They spoke of building a life together, not mining claims or silver deposits." The third rider dismounted, revealing a face that bore a striking resemblance to the description of Charles Harrison. "I'm Thomas Collins. Robert was my brother. He knew Blackwell was onto him, so he encoded the information in those pretty love letters he sent you. He figured they wouldn't suspect a mail-order bride of carrying mining secrets." "That's absurd," Daisy protested. "There was nothing encoded in those letters." "Not in the words, maybe," Thomas Collins replied. "But did you never wonder why he insisted you bring the letters with you? Why he was so specific about you keeping them safe?" Realization dawned on Owen. "The paper," he said slowly, "or the ink, something about the physical letters themselves contains the information." Burke spat impatiently. "Enough talk. Hand over the letters, woman, and we'll be on our way." "And if I refuse?" Daisy challenged, her revolver steady despite her evident fear. "Then things get unpleasant," Burke promised, his hand moving to his gun. What might have escalated into bloodshed was interrupted by the sound of more approaching riders. Sheriff Miller appeared with 2 deputies, their weapons drawn. "Lower those guns, gentlemen," the sheriff commanded, "unless you fancy spending time in my jail." Burke hesitated, clearly calculating his odds. With a disgusted oath, he lowered his weapon, his companions reluctantly following suit. "This is a private business matter, Sheriff," Burke tried. "Nothing that concerns the law." "Threatening citizens at gunpoint concerns me plenty," Sheriff Miller replied evenly. As does the murder of Robert Collins, which I'm beginning to suspect has Blackwell Mining's fingerprints all over it. As the sheriff took Burke and his companions into custody, Owen turned to Daisy. The revelation about the letters had clearly shaken her. "He never cared for me at all," she whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I was just a convenient courier for his mining information." Owen reached for her hand, surprised at his own boldness. "We don't know that," he said gently. "The letters I read contained genuine warmth. Perhaps he began the correspondence for one reason but continued it for another." Daisy allowed him to lead her back inside, where she sank into a chair, emotionally exhausted. "It doesn't matter now," she said. "He's gone, and with him, any future I thought I might have here." "Not necessarily," Owen found himself saying. The events of the past hours had crystallized something within him, a realization that the careful isolation he'd built around himself was not protection but a prison of his own making. "What do you mean?" Daisy asked, looking up at him with those expressive brown eyes. Owen took a deep breath, scarcely believing what he was about to propose. "I mean that you could stay here." "With me?" Daisy stared at him, clearly uncertain she'd heard correctly. "As your housekeeper." "No," Owen said firmly, "not as my housekeeper. As—" he faltered, suddenly acutely aware of his presumption. They'd known each other barely 2 weeks. What was he thinking? But something in Daisy's face, a mixture of hope and vulnerability, gave him courage to continue. "I know it's sudden, some might say foolish, but these past days have shown me something I've been denying for years, that a life lived alone isn't really living at all." Owen ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by his inability to express himself eloquently. "What I'm trying to say, Daisy Hammond, is that I'd like you to consider staying, not as my housekeeper or my guest, but as my wife, in time, when you're ready." Daisy's eyes widened. "Owen, you can't possibly." "I can," he interrupted. "And I do. I'm not Charles Harrison. I can't offer you flowery words or romantic promises. What I can offer is honesty, hard work, and a commitment to building something real together. Something that won't vanish with the morning light or turn out to be a deception." Tears spilled over onto Daisy's cheeks. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," Owen insisted. "I know you're brave and resilient. I know you face your troubles head-on instead of running from them. I know my home feels more like a home with you in it." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "What I don't know is whether you could ever see yourself building a life here with me." Daisy rose from her chair and moved toward him, her expression unreadable. When she was standing directly before him, she reached up and gently touched his face, her fingers cool against his skin. "When I came west, I was running from one life and chasing another, both of which turned out to be illusions," she said softly. "But here, with you, for the first time I feel as though I've found something real." "Something true." Hope surged in Owen's chest. "Is that a yes?" A smile bloomed on Daisy's face, transforming it entirely. I think we should court properly first, Mr. Jorgensen. But yes, I would very much like to stay and see where this leads us." Owen had never been a demonstrative man, but in that moment, the joy that filled him demanded expression. He lifted Daisy off her feet and spun her around, eliciting a surprised laugh that was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. When he set her down, he kept his arms around her, marveling at how natural it felt to hold her close. "I promise you won't regret this," he said fervently. Daisy's smile turned mischievous. "I'll hold you to that, Cowboy." The events that followed unfolded with a speed and resolution that surprised even Sheriff Miller. Examination of the letters revealed that the watermarks, when held to light in a specific sequence, formed a detailed map of silver deposits on Blackwell Mining Company land. The company had been systematically understating their findings to avoid taxation and government oversight. Burke and his companions faced charges not only for threatening Daisy and Owen, but also for their suspected involvement in Robert Collins's death. Evidence suggested Collins had discovered Blackwell's deception and attempted to expose it, leading to his murder. Most surprising of all was the arrival of a thin, nervous man from Boston who turned out to be none other than Philip Harrington. Far from pursuing Daisy westward, he had fled there himself, running from gambling debts and his mother's discovery of his theft. His presence in Wyoming was pure coincidence, though Sheriff Miller took great pleasure in arresting him for outstanding warrants from Boston. As for Daisy and Owen, they honored their agreement to court properly. Owen escorted her to church services in town, where she was gradually accepted by the community as they learned the truth behind her arrival. They shared suppers on the porch as summer deepened, talking long into the evening about their hopes and dreams, their pasts and potential future. Owen postponed his cattle drive until fall, unwilling to leave Daisy alone until all threats had been thoroughly neutralized. When he finally did depart, he returned in record time, unable to bear the separation he'd once found so natural. By the first snowfall, what had begun as tentative courtship had blossomed into deep and certain love. Owen proposed properly this time, with a ring purchased in Cheyenne and a speech he'd practiced for days. Daisy accepted with tears of joy, and they were married in the town church 2 weeks before Christmas, with Sheriff Miller standing as Owen's best man and the Reverend's wife attending Daisy. Their first winter as husband and wife passed in a contented blur of domestic adjustment and deepening connection. The cabin that had once felt so empty to Owen now overflowed with warmth and laughter. Daisy proved herself not just a capable helpmate but a true partner, learning the business of ranching with enthusiasm and contributing her own ideas for improvements. When spring arrived, bringing with it new calves and the promise of fresh beginnings, Owen found Daisy standing on the porch one morning, gazing thoughtfully at the distant mountains. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Jorgensen," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Daisy leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "I was just thinking about how differently things turned out from what I expected. When I first came west, I thought I was heading toward a future with a man I knew only through his letters. Instead, I found a far greater treasure in a man I came to know through his actions." Owen pressed a kiss to her temple, still marveling at his good fortune. "And I thought I wanted nothing more than my own company and my own land. Turns out what I really needed was you." Daisy turned in his arms, her brown eyes dancing with happiness and a secret she'd been saving for just the right moment. "Well, Mr. Jorgensen, it seems you're going to get even more company than you bargained for. By Christmas, there will be 3 of us in this cabin." Owen stared at her, momentarily uncomprehending. Then understanding dawned, and with it a joy so immense he could scarcely contain it. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're having a baby." Daisy nodded, her smile radiant. "A child of our own. A new beginning." As Owen held his wife close, his heart full to bursting with gratitude and love, he reflected on the strange path that had led them here. A lost bride with secrets that weren't hers, a lonely cowboy who'd forgotten how to connect, and the unexpected journey that had transformed them both. The frontier that had once seemed to demand isolation as the price of survival now offered them its greatest gift, the chance to build something lasting together, a family, a home, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all begun with an act of simple kindness, a cowboy offering shelter to a lost bride whose secrets, in the end, had opened the door to a future brighter than either of them could have imagined.